Thank you, Daryl, and thank all of you. I'm going to take a little bit different approach today. Most of you know that I had a little surgical procedure not too long back, and so I'm going to take the excuse/reason of that to sit here rather than wander around, which is way out of my normal comfort zone because I'm one of those that likes to be able to move around and use hands, feet, and everything else when I give a talk like this. This afternoon, I'm actually going to do something that's also really different for me. When Daryl contacted me and said, would you be willing to do one of the pro chats, Daryl and I have known each other for as long as he's lived here in Starkville. And I said, sure, immediately, be happy to do that. What do you want me to talk on? And he gave me this topic, and I said, oh. And so I didn't say, well, on second thought, but I certainly internally said, well, this will be different because normally what you do when you're in a position like mine is you will have given enough different talks that you will be able to yank a slide from here and yank a slide from there and slap something together and give a talk, or you're talking about something that you've been doing research on or so that others have been telling you about, so you're just kind of, and this one, as you can imagine, took a lot of thought. And I will tell you, and I'll talk about this point again a little bit later on, but I will tell you that I've probably had as much fun myself putting this presentation together as anything that I've done in a long time professionally. And so I hope that comes through for you today as well. And I'm going to actually give you some homework walking away. So the teacher in me comes out again. But I want you to go through over the next few weeks the same thing that I have done as I have prepared for this. Because this is, as Daryl said, this is one of those that really gets to the who you are. And kind of the exercise that I went through to be able to prepare for this, because I've never actually sat down and thought about this in a way of how would I articulate this to somebody else, like I've done in preparation for this presentation. And maybe I should say, rather than presentation, I should say, I hope that it's a conversation. And so if anybody wants to interrupt me, it will not be an interruption. It will just be a part of the conversation as far as I'm concerned. And I'm going to leave plenty of time at the end so that we can talk about this further. I can even get into some more of the details of kind of what I've been personally going through as far as this goes. So when we talk about core values, and I guess the other thing that I would say is I have talked on core values before, but it's always been in the context of what are the institutional core values. Or, you know, I'm one of the leaders in our church. You know, we've talked about kind of what are the core values of that organization. So most of the time, in fact, frankly, if you get on Amazon.com and start looking at, just type in the words core values, what you see is there's lots and lots and lots of things that have been published on this, but it's almost all focused on business. And so what I'm going to be talking today is the word cloud that surrounds each one of you individually in terms of your core values. And so obviously there's some business applications of that or institutional applications of that, but I want to take it from a really different approach than what typically is out there in the literature. Now, what are core values? And I've got a couple of slides that talk about this, but I really kind of want to drill in on each one of these because if you don't get this, you don't get the rest of what I'm going to talk about. And so I want to spend some time talking about what they are and also a slide or two about what they're not, okay? Core values are what really, as I said, it's the who you are. And in another slide, I want to talk about aspirational values versus intrinsic values. But from a core value standpoint, what I'm talking about today is the things that govern the personal relationships that you have. And it's things that guide you and how you go about your life. Not guide you in life necessarily, but how you go about living your life your core values really are the drivers behind that. This third one is the one that I probably appreciate the most. It actually really helps clarify who you are. And the exercise that I did personally in this that I'm going to share with you, as I said, was probably one of the more fun exercises that I've gone through. It was also kind of soul-searching in some ways, and that's what I want to challenge you to do. This next one, it helps us articulate what we truly do stand for. And my hope is that as you walk away today and as you think about this, you're willing to be really honest with yourself, because you can't take my core values and say, okay, that's what I am, because it's not. Because it's much more than just a statement of what I want to be. It's a statement about who I am and what I'm all about. It also explains why we do what we do. Sometimes you can look back and you say, what was I thinking? Or why did I do that? Or why did I do it that way? Or why did I say it that way? And the more you understand your own personal core values, the more you're going to understand why you do that. And it's also going to help you in thinking through, what would I want to do next time based on the who you are. And this last one, it guides us on how to teach and be taught. As anybody that's been an instructor in whatever it is, whether it's a formal instruction role here at the university or informally teaching somebody how to do something that you know how to do, or just a class of any kind, you quickly learn that if you got more than one student, they learn in different ways. And so understanding your core values, your own personal core values, helps you understand how you learn and how you would go about sharing that knowledge with other people. Now, they also inform us, for us and for other people, on what we see as rewards. And the things that I recognize as a reward to me, as you'll see in just a few minutes, are actually probably very different than what many of you will see. My guess is that when you go about doing this, and if you're honest with yourself, you're going to come up with actually a really different list than the list that I put together for myself. And that's a really good thing. It's a really good thing, because this would be a miserable place to work if we were all exactly the same. And so one of the things that this has also helped me think about is, what are the complementary core values of the people around me that I want to actually recruit to be able to not duplicate but complement the values that I bring to the table. These are the things that just are the underpinnings of our lives. And they don't require justification, because it is who we are. Okay? And we'll probe on that in several other ways as we kind of go through this. And if you boil it down to it, these are kind of the essential tenets that you live your life by. And as we go through, as I talk about this, I want you to really understand that these core values, there is a good way to express these in a positive way. There's also some ways that you could look at it from a negative standpoint, and the negatives do come out. And you need to be able to see both sides of that, to be able to clearly understand how you can capitalize on that as a core value and work with it, as opposed to being frustrated by it. And so we'll talk about that some more in just a little bit. So what are they not? These are not operating practices. These are not a rules list by which you live your life. Okay? These are not personal strategies, and probably most importantly, what I would say, what I'm talking about today, these are not things that I aspire to be, but rather these are the things of having the self-perception of, this is who I am. Now, is there wrong? There's absolutely nothing wrong with aspirational core values, okay? So please don't misunderstand what I'm getting at there. But What I'm here to talk about today this is the who I am rather than who I even might want to be. These are not cultural norms, okay? And I'll talk about this in just a little bit later on, but I want to reference it here. These are not things that we just expect of leaders, okay? Because those are a given in terms of aspirational values, but they're not given in terms of the intrinsic values of the who we are. And there's a very, I'm kind of hitting on that several times because I want you to be really sure and understand what I'm trying to drive at. And these are things that also talked about, they were things that are fundamental tenets of who you are. These are not things that change based on the external circumstances that you're in. These are, again, that intrinsic part of the who I am. So let me stop for a minute. So if we're going to think about this university, I want you to answer two questions all at once. What would you consider to be a core value of Mississippi State University, and tell me why you think it is a core value? Pardon? Access, and tell me what you mean.
We try to be open to people from no matter what background that they can have access to world-class higher education.
Okay, and so I think that's a great starting point. Access is a really good word to choose. We are the people's university, and I think we mean that. We really try, we take the land grant mission to heart, and we really try to embody the fact that we are an institution that's high quality education for everyone. Okay, Jeremy?
Service is one.
Service, and what do you mean by that?
And this part of that land grant mission is sort of helping our stakeholders where we can benefit the state and the economy.
Jeremy hit on to me another great word for this university, and I love to talk about the fact that the MSU seal is what it is in terms of learning and research and service all in that circle, and they all connect to each other in a beautiful way at this institution to be able to capitalize on the strengths of each one of those three pillars, but service is a very fundamental aspect of what this university really is all about. Okay? That's two great words. What else?
Opportunity.
Okay, tell me what you mean.
Opportunity for students to progress toward adulthood. And,
Okay.
Opportunities for people who work here to grow and to offer their expertise to others.
Okay, I appreciate you adding on that second part, because that's kind of what we're here today about too, isn't it? That's what the whole definition of the ProChat series is about as well. Opportunity for our students, but also opportunity for us to be able to challenge ourselves for personal growth and professional growth, and to be able to advance and to be able to learn and do new things. Okay, anybody else? Yes.
Community outreach.
Okay.
And so a lot of educational programs through extension and through departments kind of get information out there to people and to the public, and that helps. I think that's also a core value for MSU.
Yep. Community outreach, you know, again, I couldn't agree more, and it ties to the service, but it's different than just a service role. You know, we really do tie down to that local level. You know, President Keenum always does a wonderful job of talking about the fact that we have an office in every county in the state of Mississippi. There's a lot of land-grant universities that can't say that, and that's kind of another core part of who we are, is that taking it down, taking it out to that local community level to be sure that we're having the kind of impact and take advantage of the opportunities that we have. Okay? Anyone else?
Ring true is important to me.
Ring true. Tell me what you mean.
Well, when you say something or publish something to the best of your knowledge, it's truth and fact.
Okay.
That you can count on.
All right. You know, the Ring True program, we actually had a senior executive retreat to talk about who we are. We didn't call it a core values retreat, but that's in essence what it was. And then how we want to go about telling our story. And there was a lot of frustration. I'll tell you, as the chief research officer of the university, one of the things that I hate the most is the phrase best kept secret, because that means we haven't told our story. And so if we're still a secret, and so we actually talked about that a lot, about how we can tell our story, and the ring true idea that came out of that, and Sid and all of his people, as well as so many here at the university that helped in that marketing and branding and just image development program, really rallied around that, because it means different things to different people, and obviously it plays off of our cowbell tradition, but the whole idea of ringing true and being true to who we are and all of the other things that we talked about, I think did a marvelous job of capturing that. And so I wouldn't have thought of that as a core value, but I think that's another good example of one. Well, I want you to continue to think about that from an institutional standpoint, because as we're continuing, you know, I need the feedback that you're giving me as number one, as a reminder of who we are, but also as we continue to think about how we tell our story best, it all ties back to the core values that all of you have talked about. Now, what I want to talk about again, I mentioned this twice already, but I want to just be really sure. Aspirational values are things that we want to be. You know, I guess I want to be honest. I want to have high integrity, but I'm not necessarily saying that's where I am right now, okay? So aspirational values are those things that I set out there that I want to grow into, all right? Whereas the intrinsic values are the things that we are right now. I'm going to be focusing on the latter, not to downplay the first one, but rather to focus on helping you grapple with how you go about that. All right, so I want you to think with me as we go through this. All right, and this is not an exercise that you're going to do. I want to tell you, I spent probably 8 weeks with the exercise that I'm about to walk you through. And I'm still in the process of it. And so the things that I will show you from my own personal standpoint, I will tell you I'm not satisfied with yet, okay? But we are where we are today, all right? But I want, I've got a book reference at the end that I'll share with you. If you're interested in reading more about this and applying it to your own personal life, then you can buy it on Amazon.com or wherever you want to go to get it, or just take a look at some other things for some personal reading sake. But I want you to go through this with me. I want you to think about at least one thing, and hopefully it will be more than one thing, but it's the things that stand out in your life, the memories that you have. And so I'm 57 years old, so I developed a list of probably 60, and it's a random set of things, okay? I mean, everything from some real highs to some real lows in my life, going all the way back to some of the earliest memories I had as a child. And that's going to seem like an odd place to start. But then what you'll do is I want you to then, after you write these down, I want you to write it down as whole sentences, okay? So that it really captures the essence of that memory. And what you'll do is you'll write these out, and then you go back over the list, and especially if you do this on a word processor, it's really easy, then you can start rearranging them, because what you're going to see is there's some that have some relationships that you would never have thought about. And so you're going to condense these into 1 or 2 or at the most 3 words. So what's the essence of that sentence that you had? In other words, what's the essence of that memory that you had, in terms of being able to really step back and capture why do I remember that thing from when I was 7 years old? And in all likelihood, you've probably never thought about it from why do I remember that? Well, yeah, that's a really strong memory, but why? And then from there, I want you to go in and do the rearranging. And I want you to group them into clusters. Now, the great thing about word processing is that you can do all kinds of rearranging, because what I did when I did it was I kind of grouped some, but then as they began to group, one that I thought really fit up here, all of a sudden I'm beginning to see something that comes out, and all of a sudden I drop it down here. And it changed kind of the context of the entire grouping when I did that. And so this is not something that you do in 20 minutes. This is something that you do, and then you put it down, and then you come back to it in a few days, and you look at it, and you think about it, and you rearrange, and then you look at it, and then you step back and you think about what are the themes that are coming out of that. And at that point in time, you don't have to worry about pretty words and things like that. And sometimes the themes that are going to come out may sound like the negative aspects of you. And that's okay. That's absolutely okay. And then what you do is you write a summary sentence about who I am based on that cluster. And then you let it ferment for a while, and you come back to it, and I can tell you that after the first time I did it and the second time I did it, I essentially scrapped everything I did the first time and started all over again. Okay, and so that's kind of the way that you need to approach this, is just really think about what's coming out. And sometimes it takes a while for the kind of the truth to come out of, why have I put all these, why are all these memories the way they are, and why do they speak to me in the way that they do? And what I found was that after I got to this point, I wound up with some other memories that had kind of come forward that I hadn't written down in the first 50 or 60, and I started adding to. And then I started the whole process all over again, because it was a very insightful process that I had never been through in that form, okay? And so then the next hard part, number 8, is you need to have not one but several people that you can go to and bounce these off of and get the unvarnished truth about whether it's an accurate depiction of you. All right, and I'll jump all the way down here to the bottom. Okay, so one of the things that you'll see that I'll talk about in just a moment from my own standpoint is optimism. And Sherry, my wife, when she looked at it, she says, "Yeah, that's another nice way of saying you're Pollyanna," which I don't know, in our nearly 40 years of marriage, I can't tell you how many times that she has told me that I'm a Pollyanna. And that's okay. We have a lot of fun with that. But that's an example of what I was saying, is sometimes what may seem like a really nice word that you can choose, somebody else looks at it from a very different way. And I actually changed some of the verbiage on what you'll see in just a moment based on her feedback on that point, as well as some others. But you need to be able to bounce this off of at least one coworker that will absolutely tell you the truth, and somebody in your own personal life that will absolutely tell you the truth. Because if people that know you really well cannot see this as, yeah, that's one of those duh moments, yeah, that's you, then you need to rethink. And so then from there, and the book that I referenced, I'll tell you a story about the author of the book. He said, as he looked back, one of the things that was a recurring theme all the way through his life was he had this insecurity that he needed to be liked. And he was going to do whatever it took to be liked. So sometimes he was the class clown, just to be able to get the attention in the way that he was looking for it. And sometimes he was willing to allow himself to be run over because he just wanted people to like him. And so this is one of those negative aspects, but as he thought it through, he started thinking about, well, how could this very negative thing in his own mind become something that he actually could embrace? And so the phraseology that he used was, I'm a community builder. Okay, so let's make something out of this negative thing in his life that had always bothered him, and let him embrace that and try to put it into such a positive form that he actually now, works in a religious organization and works at building these communities. And so he's actually changed his life based on kind of going through this and realizing who he was and then embracing that rather than trying to change who he was, okay? So, I want to deviate for just a moment because you're not going to see this list as I go through my stuff. And there's a survey that was done, and these 5 points are things that everybody expects of their leaders. And so I felt like, I'm not going to put these up just because they're on a list and I'm a vice president, so I need to put these up here. But I'm going to acknowledge these as incredibly important, and especially the last one, the integrity part of it. Without the integrity that I expect of myself and that others expect of me in the role that I'm playing, and without the integrity that you should have in the role that you're playing in your personal as well as your professional life, it's one of those nothing else matters. So I am not listing these, even though you might expect to see them from me because I'm the vice president for research, as Darrell said. But it's not that I'm ignoring them. I'm trying to drill deeper than that as I went through from my own personal standpoint. So, number one, I've already talked about this one. And as I look through, there's been lots of times in my life, whether it was my family life, whether it was my personal life, whether it was my work life, I'm not one of those that worries. And several of the memories that went through my life was things worked out. I couldn't see how it was going to begin with, and I know that's different than some other people. Sherry is a great compliment to me, and that's not one of her core values because she is the type that tends to worry a little bit more, and we're a great team because of that. But this is one of the things that probably, and I list it first because it probably came through the strongest as much as anything in my life, and some of it is I've just got this fundamental belief that God's going to take care of things, and sometimes I don't know how. And sometimes I wish I did, but I don't. But I sleep really well at night, pretty much all the time, because I just don't go to bed worried. If I can't take care of it, then that's for somebody else to take care of. And that's one of the things that, as a kind of a core value, I've been thinking a lot about how do I tap into this and use it, both personally and professionally, to both compliment others and to be able to help others. And so it's been a real good challenge for me to think about this one. Now the next one, and you'll find two here that are going to sound like I'm saying two different things. And so I actually want to kind of have some fun and play with that just a little bit. This is one of those that I'm the type that if I truly believe in something, I may lose today, but I'm going to think about it and I'm going to back up and find another way tomorrow. And there were several times in my life when I had something happen negative, but I didn't let it take me down. I either got angry about it and thought, well, I'll figure out another way, or just simply used it in a positive way to back up and say, okay, so we're going to have to find a different approach on this. This one is one of those that from a personal life standpoint, also can be a negative, because it can mean that I can come across as hard-headed or dogmatic or lots of ugly words that you could say here to really indicate that I'm going to do whatever it takes to be able to win. Okay, and there were a few memories that I had that played to that I've got to win type thing. And so this one is one that I would probably highlight as one of those that's got the negative aspects as well as the positive aspects. Okay, so This one sounds completely opposite. But one of the things that I would say that if you had taken a snapshot of me when I was 20 and take a snapshot of me now, there are some pretty big changes that happen. And that was partly because of some life events and partly because of just growing and maturing. And one of the things that I have found out, and so let me go back to this one. So this is where the two play, can play in a really weird way together. Okay, so if we go back to this one, I'm truly committed to changing things that I really believe in. And one of the ways that I can do that is if I can understand what drives the other person, then I can try to figure out how to get my way. So I told you I was going to be very transparent on this, okay? So the two can work together in some really positive ways. The two can also work together in some really negative ways. And that to me was the fun of this exercise, is really thinking about how some of my core values can really play off of each other in those kinds of ways. But I really, truly do, and I guess the older that I've gotten, I won't say I'm a great listener, but I truly am getting better at really trying to listen to what somebody is saying, because what I find is that if I can truly understand where someone else is coming from, it's almost never that they're coming from an unreasonable position. Because in their mind, they're completely justified in believing what they're believing or doing what they're doing. And so I'm a curious person. And I really do want to understand why. It may make no sense to me, the stance that they're taking. But if I can truly get in their head and truly understand why they're doing what they're doing or thinking what they're thinking, I can understand the rationale. And sometimes it actually is pretty revealing to me, because sometimes their rationale is pretty good. And so that's one of those that I have enjoyed seeing this develop in my own life, because it has really changed the approach that I take in conversations that are meaningful. And then this one that I will tell you, I love to teach. I tell people that since I moved into this position and I can't teach here at the university, I teach the college Bible class on Sunday mornings, because I've just got that itch. And it's not necessarily so much that I get this thrill out of being up there, because if you ever took one of my classes, it's a very conversational class. This is very weird for me to do this much talking without as much feedback from you, because I always find that, number one, when I'm teaching a class, I learn more than the students do. And I don't care how many times I've taught the class. And number two, the students always make it such a rich experience, because they bring those perspectives that I've never thought of. They bring questions that I don't have the answers for, and I guess I'm mature enough now that I don't mind saying I don't know, but let's find out together. And so to me, one of the things that is kind of, and I would say this is probably what drew me to academia to begin with, was right off the bat, I was, especially when I was in graduate school, most of my peers were going out and working in industry. I worked in agriculture and specifically in weed science, as you've seen, and I'd say probably 90+% of my peers were going out and taking jobs with Syngenta and Monsanto and Dow and DuPont and all of those. And I had zero interest in doing that, because from really early on I recognized that, especially working with grad students and working with undergraduate students and people, that when you can see that spark of inspiration that comes in somebody's eyes when they get something and they're going to be able to do something with that, that's what probably gets my juices flowing as much as anything that there is. And so, frankly, that's one of the reasons why I so readily agreed to do this today when Darrell asked, because I love doing this kind of thing, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation part of what we're doing here. So, that's the last slide. if obviously I'm not selling somebody else's book, but this is where I took some of this. I can tell you that I probably read maybe half a dozen books and looked at a lot more material online to be able to come to this today. But what I would say is, I would be really shocked and disappointed if you don't go through this exercise and find it one of the most meaningful things that you've ever done. Because the opportunity to take this approach, and the reason that I followed in this much detail, was it really allowed me to look at myself in some ways that I had just never looked at myself before. And so I would wholeheartedly encourage you to go through this exercise. Daryl brought copies of my slides, and I think they're great take-home to be able to think about going through the process, because the more you get back to those early points that I made about personal core values, the more you understand really who you are, the more you can, number one, be more comfortable in your skin, but the more you can use those strengths that you have and those core values and core talents that you have to be able to do things in different ways that will benefit you as well as all of those around you. So let me stop there and let me throw it wide open for questions. And anything from what my list of 60 things was all the way to violently disagreeing with me on the things that I've talked about today. Anything's fair game. Questions?
Did it scare you?
It did. I guess it scared me from a couple of different things. The more I started thinking about, because the first time that I looked at the topic that Daryl gave me, I saw core values and I thought institutional core values, because that's what everybody always thinks about. But then when it got into when I really started thinking about this and what I wanted to do with this, there were several things that as I began to think back through my life. So let me give you one of the scary things. Several years ago, through what I would contend was no fault of mine, I wound up involved in a situation in which I was called into federal court to testify against somebody. And it was the most hellacious time that I have had in my adult life. And obviously that is a serious memory of mine. And in fact, there's about 2 or 3 memories that were just jumped out on the page. And it really had me thinking a lot about, why did I allow myself to get into that situation to begin with? And that's when you really begin drilling down into what are those underlying core values that allowed me to put myself into that situation in which I was, there for a while. It even looked like I might even be investigated. And so it was a frightening time. And so from day 0 all the way to today, I never believed that I did something wrong, but it really drove home, I need to grapple with what are the flaws in my character that allowed that to happen to begin with. So a personal story that was even more than you asked, but that's the kind of thought process that I went through that was really a few of the things that were on there. It was kind of, when I started thinking about the why, it was kind of a slap in the face to really wake me up.
So if you had to move yourself to where you wanted to go, or you say, David Shaw is David Shaw, let's just move a little bit.
So I would say David Shaw is always a moving target. Okay, because like I said, the David Shaw of when I was 20 years old and the David Shaw of 57 years old is pretty dramatically different people. Now, there are some characteristics. The optimism part, I've always been that way. For right or for wrong, for better or for worse. That's kind of one of those who I am. But some of these, I would say, I probably wouldn't have identified 30 years ago compared to what I am. And I'm actually comfortable with that, because I think we all need to be growing. I think life experiences need to be able to bring us to kind of new core values as we learn. 2 great questions. What else?
We as a unit did a strengths finder session, thanks me.
Yeah.
What would you see as that relationship between your strengths and your core values?
So obviously I think they're going to be related in some ways, but if you look at the list that I gave you, none of those would have come out in strengths finders. And so it's actually, I've been through the same exercise, and I love it. I think it's fantastic. But the things that are who you are that I listed actually kind of get at some things that an exercise like Strength Finders will never go to. Others? Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever find out when you got down to shortening your sentences and getting down to the words that you would look at and say, oh no, I don't do that? That's not
There were a few of those. And especially as you begin writing some things out that are on the negative side, you don't want to believe that. And you know, there were a couple of those that I really had to spend a lot of time thinking about it to kind of grapple with the negatives and the positives that were associated with that. I so appreciated the example that the author gave about he just had a fundamental need to be liked, and almost nobody in here would ever say that that's a positive characteristic. But he goes through the process of talking about how he talked it through to be able to see that that was actually something that he could capitalize on rather than how do I wash that out of my system.
Were you able to identify most or all of your negatives that your peers or whoever you asked?
Well, I would never say most or all because there's plenty out there that probably haven't.
Well, I know, but you know, our perception of
Yeah.
when you take a deep dive
Well-
into what you see and what you feel internally, is that what somebody else is seeing or going to give you feedback?
So you will identify a lot. Now, what I would contend is this exercise is not necessarily designed to get at all the negatives, because when your starting point is all of the memories in your life. I mean, number one, we tend to kind of downplay the negative aspects in our life in terms of the really strong memories that we have. And so I think it's biased against that in some ways. And so I would say this is probably not the right exercise to go through to just get at all the negative aspects of your life. Rather, this is really focused a little bit more on the positive side of this is who you are because of the exercise that you go through.
Well, we see some of those things and we tend to beat ourselves up over them.
Absolutely. And I think that in and of itself, if we tend to beat ourselves up over it, it actually is worth going through that mental exercise of thinking about, well, instead of beating myself up, what do I do with this? Again, back to the example that the author gave. And there, there were the two that I said that played off of each other as opposites. I really thought a long time about those because they just speak to completely different things. And you think, how could one person be both of these things? And so that's probably the area that I'm not the most satisfied with and how I'm articulating it. And so what I would say is that if I gave this presentation again in 6 months, the words might be a little different. And I will say, when I bounced this off of Sherry, she was the first one that I did it with. And when I bounced it off of her, she immediately, one of the kind of the key words that I'd chosen, she said, that's not right. And that was really good because it was one of those that after she said it and we talked about it for a while, she was right. And that's the kind of feedback that you need to get from some people that you really know and trust so that you can really get down to, okay, so if that word doesn't fit, then what does fit? Because I've got something here that I was really grappling with, but I wasn't able to articulate it very well or condense it down very well into a word or two or three.
Is there a process by which you tend to reevaluate or certain time, or do you just go by circumstances and situations?
So I could interpret your question two different ways, and so let me talk about that just a little bit, from both ways. I guess my immediate knee-jerk reaction to your question is I don't do that. I'm not the type to do that nearly as often as I should. In other words, the time to really that introspection and self-reflection and what did I learn from this, I tend to keep my life way too full, and so I don't punch pause long enough. Frankly, this surgery has slowed me down, and I've actually used it in a way that I don't normally take the time to do in terms of some of that, and so I've actually really enjoyed that. Now, you know, from tying your question to my topic today, you know, I think that's an incredibly important aspect of that, and that's why I said I've worked on this for at least 6 or 8 weeks, because I have really spent some time. Now, in other words, 6 or 8 weeks ago, it's probably more like 8 now, was when I first made my list. And boy, I got to rolling, and I had memories coming out, and I got to 50 just like that. And so it's the what do you do with that is the thinking about really what's the reflection, and tie that to some of the things that was being said here just a moment ago. What I'm seeing the value of is it makes me think more about who I am, and it has made me think a lot more about how I play to not only my strengths, but also play to really who I am. I'm not sure if I answered your question, Raj. Okay.
When you started this, you probably thought that you already knew what your core values were. Just like any of us would probably come up with a list pretty quick if we were put on the spot. How much did they change as you went through this? And did you, in the end, did those original core values end up being more aspirational values than your intrinsic values?
So I would say, I mean, you've touched on a really good question. And so from my standpoint, I would say that of the 4 that I gave you, and I there for a while I had 7, and I condensed it down, and I've played with all of that too. You know, there's at least, I'm kind of really comfortable with it now, but it's not the ones that I came up with, except optimism. That's the one that I probably just knew that was just kind of who I was, okay? But the others really took a lot of thought. And like I said on that one slide, you know, if you go all the way back to this one, you know, you want integrity to be the big one, okay? Because that's what you want to be known for. I was tending to want to go to those 5 characteristics of leaders because that's what's expected of yourself, and that's what's expected by other people of you. And so I probably kind of had to take some off the list once I went through this exercise, because I was trying to force fit things that I felt like other people felt like I should be, as opposed to who I really was.
Can you give an example of a sentence you did and like how you condensed it down to a couple words?
Okay. So, you know, one of the sentences that I had was when our daughter was, well, actually, let me use a different one. When our son was born, he went 48 hours without urinating. And that's a very strong memory in my life, because they were talking about congenital defects that were going to require surgery, and it was a frightening time. It was one of those that you know, our whole family was freaked out. But I didn't freak out. And so, you know, the ability to kind of just know that it's going to take place, and again, sometimes I need to be worried more than I am, and so that's that negative aspect. And so kind of the point that came out of it was trusting God, but the negative aspect of that I wrote as kind of the second little phrase was blind trust. Okay? And so there's kind of a negative aspect on that as well, because sometimes I can just say, well, it'll just play out, and I need to be doing something to intervene to make sure that it works out right. And so that was probably one that stands out in my mind big time, that I actually wrote 2 different short phrases, thinking about it from a positive and from a negative standpoint. Yes, ma'am.
So were you worried about who you selected to talk about this with?
I really thought about it a lot. You know, in terms of you've got to choose somebody that will be brutally honest with you.
How about dishonest?
I like my phrase better. So, and I'll actually stick with mine, because, you know, the honest thing to do might be to, oh yeah, that sounds okay. And that's not what you're looking for. You know, you really want to be able to have what the example that I gave you, no, that word doesn't fit. So that you can step back and really think about it again. Now, the flip side of it, it's got to be brutally honest and somebody that's not going to use it against you or that will violate trust. And so that's a very special person to be able to do that. Brutal sounds harsh, and so I know that it is, but you do have to choose people, at least 2 people, that will be really honest. How about we choose that word? Really honest, but also that you really trust what they're going to say. Okay? What else? Well, I've enjoyed the conversation part of this a lot, and I hope you've gotten something out of this. My challenge to you is, whether you follow this or whether you follow some other program, really spend some time thinking about who am I, what are my core values, and how do I capitalize on those. And with that, I'll turn it back to Darrell.
All right, let's get back to